Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In the two last chapters of his work, Understanding Anger, at the end of Book 3, Seneca is going to provide us with a consideration, and you could even call it also a practice, that he says that is the most effective way to curb anger. So when we see that, we can say, wow, he saved the best for last, and we really want to focus on this. And to some, it might be rather commonsensical, but it's something that we easily lose sight of, and something that Seneca talks about in other works, for example, one which is on the very shortness of life. So he says, nothing is more effective than contemplating, thinking about our mortality. And so it's cogitatio mortalitatis, mortality, and then the cogitatio. This could be a process of thinking, or it could also be a thought that we have ready at hand. And he's going to say a number of different things in these last two chapters. One of them is that we actually don't have time to waste, something that we often lose sight of. So nec tempus vacit perdere. And Seneca does stress in other places that you don't get more time, or if you do, it's certainly not by getting angry. You get the amount that you have, and it's not as if you can store it up or save it. So we need to think about what we're using our time for. He talks about making your brief life, vitam brevam. That's, again, the topic of one of his other earlier treatises. Make it a peaceful, placidam life, right? Rather than a life full of conflict and all the things that go with that. A little bit later, he suggests that we should spend our days, this is a very interesting phrase, on honorable pleasure rather than devoting them to another's anguished torment, right? He says, what good does it do to make that sort of decision for torment rather than honorable pleasure? And here you might say, well, that's not very Stoic. Stoics are not supposed to be about engaging in pleasure. Well, he's actually saying some pleasure is morally good. Honestatum, right? Voluptatum is pleasure. So why not devote yourself to those sorts of things? I mean, you can think about what does that actually involve. So what do most people do instead, and what is he suggesting that we take a look at? Conflict. Feuds is another term. We find ourselves some people that we disagree with and that we think are out to get us, and we're out to get them as well, and they're rivals and enemies. And, the question here, is it worth spending the short, and because we're mortal, limited time that we actually have on being in and prosecuting conflicts with others? And so he talks about a number of different things, proclaiming feuds, being very public. Ooh, I'm going to get so-and-so. They're a bad person. If he didn't have social media posts at the time to do, but if Seneca were around today, he'd be saying, why are you on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, pick whatever else it is that you want, and telling people about who it is that you're having a beef with? That's not a great idea. Creating conflicts, right? Why are we creating conflicts when we don't need to? He says, why do we create conflicts for ourselves? Why do we forget our weak state and take on vast feuds, rising up to crush another when we're so easily crushed ourselves? And he actually talks about living divided against ourselves. Why do we get in an uproar and throw our own lives into confusion? It's a foolish thing for us to do, he says. Why do we use the strength that we have, he asks, to attack a person who bothers us? So he gives 2 examples. Why do you want to drag down that fellow who's dealing with you high-handedly? That's one. Why use your own strength to rub out the one who's barking at you? A low and despicable fellow, to be sure, but galling and annoying to his betters. So people treat us in ways that we don't like, and why are we wasting our time, our thought, our energy, our life on these conflicts when we don't have to be doing that? He actually suggests instead that maybe we want to do something different. Why not cause all others to love you while you live and miss you while you're gone, right? Do you want to be the kind of person when you die, people are like, well, glad that bastard is off the scene, because all they were doing was causing trouble for themselves and for other people. It's so much more peaceful when they're gone. And now he goes on and he says, why are you growing angry? And he lists a bunch of different people. Why grow angry with your slave, your inferior, the person who is subordinate to you? Why grow angry with your master? The person is your superior, the one who gets to boss you around. Your king, your client. The client in this case has to do with a certain kind of relation, a person who is dependent on you. And, this could extend to family members, and this could extend to colleagues and to friends and coworkers and neighbors. Why get angry with these people when it's not doing you any good, and sooner or later you're going to have to die? And so here's where we get to the point of this. Seneca says, what are you actually trying to do? What is it you want from these conflicts? And he says, listen, they're going to die sooner or later. What are you trying to impose on them that would be worse than the death that they're sooner or later going to have to face? And the answer is, there isn't anything worse. There's other things that we want. We want to make them suffer. Suffer what? Exile. Kick them out. There it could actually be physical exile, being forced out of Rome to some remote island, something that did happen to Seneca at one time. Disgrace, loss of social status, we could say, canceling somebody these days. Or loss, a fine, losing a relationship, all sorts of other possible losses, right? We want to impose these sorts of things on other people. And Seneca says, why the hell do you want to do that? They're not going to suffer these all that long. He says, I have more understanding for someone who wants to wound an enemy than someone who wants to give him a blister. That's not just evil-minded, it's small-minded. Whether you contemplate the worst punishment or something milder, how little time there is, either for him to be tormented by his punishment or for you to take your wicked pleasure from it. Any time now we'll cough up our last breath. And so he's got this great phrase, death makes us all equals. We are all equally going to have to face the ultimate master, the executioner, at one point or another. Any death that we experience can end all of our conflicts, and will end all of our conflicts. It's not just a potentiality. We are, Seneca says, mortal, and so every single hatred, every rivalry, every source of anger and envy that we can possibly think of is going to come to an end sooner or later. He tells us that at the morning shows in the arena, we see a bull and a bear tethered together and set to fighting. When each is had at the other, each is handed over to a waiting executioner. That's us. We do the same thing when we provoke someone who's bound to us, though the same end looms, he says, for both victor and vanquished, right? We're both going to die. And he's got this other great phrase, keep in mind that the moment that you marked out for another's death, that is the very moment that you yourself could be dying. It's, inescapable. It's somewhat random. And, by engaging in conflict, you may actually be raising the odds of you suffering an earlier death. So what would Seneca advise us to do? So this is where we actually end the work. He says, for now, while we breathe and are among our fellow humans, let's cherish the qualities that make us human. Let's cause no one fear or peril. Let's show we're above losses and injuries, above abuse and carping. Let's bear our brief inconveniences magnanimously, that is, with a great spirit. As the saying goes, no sooner do we turn and look around than death is at our elbow. So, by keeping ourselves mindful of the inevitability of death, not only for ourselves, but for the people that we are likely to be in conflict with and get angry at, we can help to curb the anger that otherwise we would most likely lapse into.